The story begins with the death of a villain who, before passing away, recognizes that he has lived a beautiful dream, even though he wanted to destroy it, devour it, and drag it down completely. In the end, he admits that he failed in his intention. After his death, the hero notes that the villain has finally succumbed and considers his end pathetic for someone so wicked. Thus ends the epilogue of the story, marking the end of the antagonist's career. Meanwhile, Nam Woo-hyun, a novelist, was reflecting on the conclusion of the story he was writing. He believed that, with the fall of the main villain, the plot was nearing its definitive end. He imagined that in the next chapter, he would be able to resolve all the points and bring the work to a close, feeling a certain relief because writing that story had been a terrible experience, since it was a novel he had never really wanted to create. But at least he was finally close to finishing. Ready to put his regrets aside, Nam was interrupted by the sound of knocking on the door. He found the situation strange because it was too late for visitors. He asked who was there, but heard no reply. Thinking that the sound had ceased, perhaps caused by some stray drunk, he turned to go back to bed. But then he noticed the presence of an unfamiliar page of paper. Picking it up, he saw that it was described as a gift, and suddenly an evil energy emanated from the paper, bringing him face to face with the very villain he had just eliminated in his story. The villain explained that this was the way he had died. He revealed that he had dedicated years of his life to honing his skills and seeking revenge on those who had destroyed his family, his friends, and his lover. But even with all that effort, he ended up failing miserably. He then stated that now Nam would have to fulfill his unfinished goal. Without warning, Nam disappeared from his world. When he woke up, he found himself in a room bathed in the orange light of sunset. When he got up, he was surprised by the different clothes he was wearing. And when he looked in the mirror, he saw an appearance that wasn't his own, with crimson hair, narrow and emotionless eyes, a cold face that he recognized immediately. At that moment, he understood that he was now inhabiting the body of Adele Arson, the most powerful villain in his own history, and he realized that there were only a few days left until this character's assassination. Adele Arsen belonged to a half-demon bloodline. His family, the Arsen, were known for their mixture of human and demon blood, which had granted them great power and influence within the empire, although that same power had been the cause of their downfall at the hands of 6 rival families. Now the entire lineage of the Arsen survived only through Adele. Nam, now inside Adele, recognized this as the sad backdrop he himself had written for his villain, a man who tried in vain to seek revenge only to fail miserably. Knowing that the time until his death was short, Adele decided to check the system of the world he was in. Despite possessing good blessings and natural talents, he was clearly inferior to the protagonists of the story, as the author had never granted him abilities that could overshadow the real heroes. At the moment, he couldn't even control his mana, a detail that was now becoming cruelly ironic, since the very background he had written would be the rope around his neck. While considering his options, Adele realized that the mysterious page was still on his bed. Suspecting that he might be able to use it to return, he approached it. But he saw that the paper was now blank, with no text on it. Although at the moment he had been transported to this world, he had the impression that he had heard the voice of the original speaking to him. Discouraged, he wondered if he would simply die there with no alternatives, until words began to appear on the sheet, as if the paper were communicating. The paper asked him if he knew how to use the gift. Adele, surprised, replied mentally, questioning what it meant and suspecting it was a trap left by Adele Arson. The paper explained that its function was to allow the purchase of information. The user could ask questions, some of which would be free, while others would require payment, depending on the importance of the question. Without wasting any time, Adele asked if there was any way to return to his original world. But the paper replied that this was impossible, which didn't surprise him. Accepting reality, Adele then focused on what was most urgent. He asked how to manipulate mana and how to use Adele Arson's unique characteristics. The paper replied that this information would be granted free of charge, as the manipulation of mana and mastery of the character's specific abilities would now be engraved directly on Nam's body, now Adele. Adele accepted the condition and was finally able to feel the mana circulating inside his new body. The first skill he acquired was called Darkness, a magic capable of completely shutting down a person's 5 senses. Although the result was a little weaker than expected, Adele considered the technique a success and saw an important use for it in the future. He then learned how to control killer intent, an aura that emanated a violent and threatening pressure capable of intimidating enemies. He reflected that experienced soldiers and trained knights might be able to resist this kind of influence, but ordinary citizens would not be so lucky. The next step was to understand the workings of the last talent inherited from Adele Arson, position transfer. The skill was explained as the power to instantly change places with a chosen object within a limited distance. Adele realized that at that moment, his ability was restricted to just 20 meters, which he found pathetic compared to the full potential of the power. But it was still something that could be practiced and improved. To test it out, he tried to switch positions with a nearby suit of armor, but the move didn't work out as expected, and he ended up being thrown awkwardly along with the armor. Despite the failure, Adele took the mistake in stride, understanding that he wouldn't master the skill on the first try, and decided that he would repeat the process hundreds or even thousands of times if necessary, as his survival depended on it. While Adele struggled to train his skills, a platoon marched towards the arson family mansion, determined to eliminate him. During the night, the soldiers arrived and easily subdued the few remaining servants. At the head of the group was Feltz, the captain of Leon County, who commanded the mission. The servants, obedient and without resistance, informed him that Adele was in his room and, when asked about his condition, said that the young heir hadn't moved for days. Faced with this information, Feltz didn't hesitate to break down the door. When Adele saw Feltz enter, he immediately understood that he would have no chance of survival if he depended on the invaders' mercy. He thought it would be absurd to expect them to leave a child like him alive in that situation. Without hesitation, Feltz considered the situation a waste of time and ordered his platoon to eliminate the target immediately. However, Adele reacted quickly and used position transfer to switch places with a nearby sword, managing to surprise the enemy and position himself with a dagger against the neck of one of the knights. Despite the unexpected move, Feltz showed no shock and simply shouted for his men to attack without hesitation. Faced with the imminent onslaught, Adele jumped out of the window and, still in the air, threw his dagger and switched positions with it, narrowly escaping, although the sequence of movements left him completely exhausted. Aware that he couldn't fight so many enemies directly, Adele determined that he needed to get to the arson forest, where there was a secret portal leading to the demon realm. Feltz, trusting his men, didn't bother to chase Adele himself, just ordered his soldiers to continue the hunt. Later, already inside the forest and still panting, Adele ran as fast as he could, knowing that, even in that dense environment, it would only be a matter of time before the soldiers and riders caught up with him. With this in mind, he decided that his best chance of survival would be to go through the hidden portal to the demon realm, a place ravaged by wars against humans, but where, if he showed enough talent, he could find acceptance and protection. The problem was that, although he knew of the portal's existence, he didn't know its exact location. While trying to find the right path, Adele carelessly stepped on a branch, which triggered an explosion of mana, the result of Feltz's power, which was already tracking his position. Luckily, Adele was able to use his position transfer ability to escape the scene of the explosion and keep running. But he knew that his strength was running out, and that his chances of continuing to flee were diminishing by the second. Desperate, he turned again to the mysterious page, asking where the exact location of the portal to the demon realm was. The paper replied that this information would come at a price, 100 gold coins or in exchange for a relic-grade artifact. Adele, exhausted and irritated, complained internally, aware that he had no access to anything close to these values or objects at that critical moment. Before he could think of a solution, a new explosion caused by Feltz's power hit him full on, throwing his body against a tree, further increasing the desperation of the situation. Feltz approached slowly, looking at the fallen Adele, and asked him if he had run because he wanted to survive, saying that it wouldn't do any good because he would die right there. Adele just laughed, saying that there was no way he was going to die, aware that there was only one last way to go: kill or be killed. Feeling the weight of that choice, he saw Feltz comment that he had resisted to the end precisely because he was the patriarch of the arson family. Adele, ironically, retorted, calling them all men who were chasing a simple child and suggesting that Feltz should perhaps change his profession to babysitting, although he thought it would be too difficult for him. Feltz, irritated by the provocation, declared that he would kill him painlessly by piercing his heart for the good of Leon County. As he advanced to attack, the blade struck the paper Adele was carrying, and at that moment the paper announced that the price had been paid. After all, the sword struck had the equivalent value of a relic. Without wasting any time, the paper said it would guide him to the hidden portal. In an instant, Adele disappeared before Feltz's eyes and reappeared directly in front of the portal to the demon realm. Without hesitation, he used his position transfer skill and ran towards the portal, while thinking that Feltz looked like a monster, still chasing him with that absurd determination. Even so, he was now faced with his only chance of escape. Feltz, overcome with rage, ripped an entire tree out of the ground and threw the trunk at Adele, shouting that he would not allow him to escape. Adele just smiled, said goodbye with a brief "see you next time," and, using his transfer once again, went through the portal to the demon realm. On the other side, Feltz stood staring at the closed portal, thinking how absurd it was that he had let Adele escape like that. Later, Adele was already in the new world, sitting quietly and eating dried meat, while wondering how much time had passed. He remembered that when he had gone through the portal, he had passed out and woken up inside a dungeon, a space clearly created by some secret demonic art. Around him, he saw a stone bed, basic supplies such as dried meat, and a chest protected by a magical barrier that prevented anyone from approaching. Looking closely, Adele concluded that someone from a high-ranking family must have built that place, although there was something strange about the way everything was organized. The stone guardian, positioned behind the barrier, looked extremely dangerous, and any reckless attempt to cross the protection would probably result in his death. While he was analyzing the situation, the paper called him back, warning him that he would only receive a light penalty this time for having tried to offer an object that wasn't really in his possession. Adele reflected that it was insane to deal with that kind of entity, but he felt relieved that they had accepted payment, even with a warning. It was then that his eyes caught something different in the room. There was a stone displaced in the wall, as if it were hiding a secret button. As he approached to investigate, a powerful voice echoed through the dungeon, telling him that he had no right to proceed. Adele understood that the button would probably deactivate the barrier, but he also understood that he would have to find another way out without risking himself directly. Adele realized that a small stone had detached itself from the stone guardian's body and, thinking quickly, designated the stone as a target for his position transfer skill. He then swapped places with it and managed to break through the barrier, preventing him from advancing. The strategy had worked, but now he found himself side by side with the stone guardian itself, which was already preparing an attack to take his head off without hesitation. Meanwhile, outside, inside the demon realm, a very wealthy man was watching from a safe place the chaos spreading below his position. This man was Crete, the patriarch of the powerful Barry's family. Nonchalantly, Crete reflected that at that very moment, his daughter was probably busy trying to break into a mid-level occult domain, something he considered problematic because, if she succeeded, she would gain the right to enter Saitan. Despite all his warnings and orders to the contrary, his daughter insisted on disobeying him, driven by the desire to avenge her mother's death at the hands of humans. Worried, Crete pondered his daughter's very real ability to survive in that cruel environment, until a maid burst in, visibly panicked. Without changing his calm tone, Crete concluded that, given the desperate way the woman had entered, the news must be urgent. The maid, trembling, quickly apologized and reported that they had received information about an unidentified person who was inside a hidden domain. The strangest thing was that there were no records or traces of this person having opened the entrance in the conventional way, leaving everyone confused as to where the intruder had come from. In a practical way, Crete asked if they had discovered the identity of the intruder yet, and was told that they had not. With a slight sneer, he reflected that it was probably a human who had been forced to enter the portal to the demon realm because of the war between the two races. Without showing much concern, he stated that the intruder would probably die soon and ordered that the main focus should remain on his daughter's test. Still, he thought that, if all went well, he could take advantage of the situation and turn that stranger into a new pawn, as long as he survived the dangers of the realm. Inside the hidden domain, Adele had made it through the first barrier and now faced the stone guardian. Observing the creature, he realized that the guardian resembled a wolf carved from living stone. In a risky move, he had almost been killed, but the stone with which he had switched positions earlier was still active, allowing him to return to a safe position in time. Without wasting any time, he analyzed the stone wolf and, once again applying the position transfer skill, designated the wolf as his target. The maneuver worked, and Adele swapped places with the creature, leaving the guardian trapped in the first barrier while he himself advanced to the second. His heart racing, Adele continued on his way, determined to find his way out of the domain. However, as he progressed, he came across another stone guardian, which seemed even more dangerous than the previous one. Without despairing, he applied the same strategy of swapping positions and thus managed to pass once again without having to face the creature directly. Repeating this tactic, he overcame various traps and obstacles, advancing further and further into the treacherous environment. After crossing countless dangers, Adele finally reached the last barrier and felt that he was close to leaving the domain. However, before he could go any further, he heard a voice echoing in the shadows, calling him an intruder, making it clear that there was still one last challenge ahead of him. As Adele analyzed the situation, he realized that he had reached the dungeon master's room, which indicated that he was very close to the end of the challenge. Without much surprise, he came across the imposing figure of the Death Knight. Assessing the enemy in front of him, Adele concluded that the horseman seemed to have a similar level of strength to Feltz, someone he had fought before, and that the two were probably equal in terms of combat ability. The Death Knight, showing respect, began to say words in honor of Adele's skill for having made it that far. However, not at all interested in the formalities or his opponent's speech, Adele used his position transfer skill to completely ignore the knight's presence and move to another area of the room, trying to focus on something more relevant to his interests. As he surveyed his surroundings, Adele's attention was soon caught by something that surprised him profoundly, a great treasure, far greater than anything he had expected to find there. Amidst the piles of riches, his gaze was drawn to one object in particular, an ornament carved in the shape of a black dragon. Adele immediately recognized the symbol, having read about it in ancient records. It was the emblem of one of the great demonic families, a clan closely associated with the 7 deadly sins. In his mind, Adele quickly recalled the sins listed in his studies: sloth, lust, gluttony, fury, greed, and envy. But when he connected the image of the black dragon, he concluded that the symbol represented pride. The realization that the treasure belonged to the dreaded Barz family, associated with the 7th sin, made Adele swallow hard, knowing that if he were captured there, he wouldn't stand a chance of survival. Even aware of the deadly risks, Adele decided that he couldn't simply ignore the treasure placed before him. Quickly and decisively, he ran to the nearest chest, ready to clean out as much as he could before escaping. However, the moment he opened the chest, he was surprised by a black energy similar to a slimy slime-like substance, which jumped straight into his face. With no time to react, the black mass violently invaded his mouth, and even though he tried to vomit, Adele couldn't stop it from spreading inside him and reaching his head. At the same moment, an unbearable pain hit him, and blood splashed violently against the wall of the room. Falling to the floor, Adele saw with horror that one of his own eyes had been blown out of his face. Confused and stunned, he asked himself if his eye had really exploded. However, before he could fully understand what was happening, he realized that the empty space left by the missing eye was being filled by the same dark energy that had invaded him. When he accessed his system, Adele found that he had acquired a new ability called the Eye of Superbia, a power that drastically increased his dynamic vision and activated automatically every time he defeated a new enemy. Analyzing the description, Adele concluded that it would be an extremely useful tool for combats against large groups of weaker enemies. Considering the new power, an excellent reward for having taken the risk of invading that hidden domain. Now, with new strength in hand, Adele decided it was time to get out of there as quickly as possible. However, as he explored the place more carefully, he noticed a hidden door that he hadn't noticed before. He quickly realized that opening that door would inevitably attract the attention of the local soldiers, which, in his current situation, would mean certain death. Faced with uncertainty, he hesitated and even considered getting down on his knees and begging for mercy, something that went against his nature, but which seemed the only alternative in the face of mounting pressure. Before taking any action, he prioritized hiding the mark on his neck, using his darkness ability to conceal his true identity, because he couldn't let them find out that he belonged to the Arson family. While he was still considering his options, the Death Knight, without showing any impatience, ordered him to open the door immediately, stating that His Majesty was about to arrive. This comment made Adele think, and he quickly understood that this dungeon was no ordinary dungeon, but an environment he specially created as a test to train members of the powerful Barz family. The makeshift bed and dried meat that Adele had found at the start of the dungeon finally made sense to him, as he now realized that it had all been prepared for someone specific. Adele quickly concluded that by taking the treasure, he had probably stolen someone else's reward, and depending on who it was, he knew he would be in serious trouble. Without wasting any time, he picked up the information paper and asked who the character closest to him was at that moment. The paper replied demanding payment, which could be 100 gold coins or a relic-ranked artifact. Assessing his options, Adele decided to take a chance and offered 100 maximum mana points as payment, even though he knew that this would leave him extremely vulnerable if he had to fight. He calculated that if he managed to survive the situation, the sacrifice would be small compared to what he could gain. The information paper accepted the payment and then revealed the answer. The figure closest to Adele was Renee, the youngest daughter of Barz, patriarch of the powerful Barz family. Upon hearing this information, Adele went completely pale, as he immediately understood that his situation had become practically untenable. He now knew that he had stolen the prize that should have been Renee's, and that the entire hidden domain had been created as a specific test to train her. With authority and power within the family, Renee could easily crush all the guardians without effort. And even worse, now she was standing directly in front of him, looking at him with a cold and dangerous expression. Renee, wielding a gun and maintaining the posture of someone who trusted no one, asked who he was. With no alternative, and overcome by despair, Adele quickly knelt down in front of her and, trying to sound as convincing as possible, congratulated the young woman, saying that she had finally become worthy, as if he were celebrating the success of her test. Renee, suspicious and serious, demanded that he explain himself properly. With his mind racing for a plausible way out, Adele improvised, saying that the patriarch had ordered him to come secretly as an undercover guard to ensure her safety during the training. He knew there was a chance that Renee had already noticed the eye of superbia that was now shining on his own face, so he decided to keep his head down to try and hide any evidence and not arouse any more suspicion. Renee, still assessing the situation, asked him directly if he really was the designated guard. Adele answered in the affirmative, trying to adopt the posture of a respectful subordinate, and emphasized that, despite his ordinary appearance, he was extremely skilled, capable of truly protecting her. The tension in the air was almost unbearable for Adele, who felt every second weigh like an eternity as he awaited her judgment. The situation became even more delicate when, in one swift movement, Adele used his position transfer skill to switch places with the sword Renee was wielding, causing the weapon to disappear from his hand and be replaced by himself. Surprised and confused, Renee couldn't understand what had happened, but keeping her composure, asked what kind of ability it was. Adele, trying to remain calm despite his fear, explained that this technique could be extremely useful for protecting her in combat situations, which was the purpose of his presence there, reinforcing his role as a guard. Even though he was still unsure whether she would fully believe the story, Adele realized that seeing Renee sigh instead of attacking him had considerably increased his chances of survival. Renee, with a serious tone, declared that they would leave immediately, showing that, at least at that moment, she didn't intend to kill him. Taking advantage of the gap, Adele hastened to remind her that the patriarch would probably be waiting for her, trying to further reinforce the idea that he was only following orders and to ensure that his farce would continue for a while longer. Adele was still considering the idea of fleeing as soon as he had the chance, but everything changed the moment the huge doors of the Barz mansion opened in front of him, revealing a large group of people with Crete Barz, the family patriarch, standing right in the center of the formation. To Adele's surprise, Crete's gaze was not on his daughter who had just passed the test, but on him, the imposter who had stolen the reward intended for Renee. Tension immediately gripped Adele, for if Crete discovered that he had taken the Eye of Superbia, his death would be certain and he would have no chance of defense, especially in his current state, with his mana extremely low after the payment made to the information paper. However, to his surprise, Crete just completely ignored his presence and focused on Renee, asking if she had made it through the domain. Renee confirmed it, and without showing much emotion, Crete ordered her to follow him, leaving Adele even more confused about his fate. As he watched the two of them walk away, Adele realized that he was trapped between two terrible options: waiting to be punished later or risking a suicidal escape at that moment. The group advanced into the mansion, where Crete dismissed all the subordinates to their posts except Adele, who was left alone in the main hall, although the presence of the guards in the shadows made it clear that he was under constant surveillance. Adele wondered if he had been left there to be executed discreetly, or if it was just another psychological test to measure his behavior. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, in Crete's private office, the patriarch congratulated Renee on the successful completion of her training and asked if she would be willing to join the special training program at the renowned Saitan Academy. Renee, enthusiastic about the opportunity, accepted without hesitation. However, Crete, ever cautious, took the opportunity to ask his daughter's opinion of the mysterious individual he had met at the end of the test. Renee commented that he seemed to be incredibly strong, which made Crete reflect silently on Adele, because even though he knew that the boy had deceived his daughter, he couldn't ignore the fact that he had survived all the dangers of the domain and still won the Eye of Superbia. Concluding that perhaps there was some potential to be explored in that audacious young man, Crete sent for Adele, who, when he was brought before the patriarch again, felt his heart almost stop with fear at the oppressive atmosphere emanating from the room. Crete stared at him with deadly eyes, and when Adele finally mustered the courage to ask why he was still alive, he received a cold and direct answer. Crete considered him a damned insolent man for having deceived his daughter so well. Without warning, Crete unleashed his demonic aura, overwhelming and suffocating, forcing Adele to kneel involuntarily under the pressure. Then Crete, with his implacable expression, demanded to know the young man's name. Adele replied, trying to maintain his dignity, that his name was Adele. Using his powers, Crete made Adele levitate and placed him on the table, as if he were evaluating him as a commodity, while Adele, confused and desperate to understand his intentions, only managed to ask what he wanted from him. Crete, wasting no time, ordered Adele to open his mouth and then summoned a small dark dragon, making it clear that the situation was about to get even worse. The patriarch explained that the dragon would be implanted inside Adele as a control measure, and from that moment on, any thought of betrayal, flight, or failure to comply with his orders would result in the immediate release of a deadly poison directly into Adele's heart. Feeling the little dark dragon invade his body, Adele realized that he was now more than ever trapped in a situation where a simple mistake could cost him his life. Despite Despite the clear threat, Crete didn't seem to have any intention of killing him straight away. He ordered them to prepare accommodation for Adele within the estate, but made it clear that it would be extremely simple and inferior to the comforts Renee would enjoy. So Adele was led to a poor bare room, a cruel reminder that, for the Barz family, he was little more than a disposable tool. Still, as he stared at the moldy ceiling of the small room, Adele promised himself that he would do anything to survive and, if possible, turn the game in his favor. Adele, already in his accommodation, reflected on the new position he had assumed within the Barz family. He knew that he now depended on Crete for his survival, and although he felt like a pawn in a bigger game, he also recognized that this was an opportunity to get closer to valuable information about the patriarch. However, his biggest problem wasn't just the discomfort of feeling used, but the dragon poison that was still coursing through his body, requiring immediate action to neutralize it. Using his position transfer ability, Adele managed to swap places with the dragon, avoiding instant death and ensuring that it stayed alive, which would somehow protect it from Crete. However, he knew that if the dragon died, Crete would realize the flaw and punish him severely. To ensure that the dragon survived, Adele used some of his mana to feed it, allowing it to go back to sleep, which gave him momentary relief, although he still felt exhausted, on the verge of passing out at any moment. Reviewing his system, Adele realized that his position transfer skill had evolved to level 2, which was a significant improvement. However, his amount of mana was still a major problem, much lower than that of the story's protagonists. He knew he had to find a way to increase his mana, but he still had no idea how to do it. A few days later, he noticed that Renee was becoming more distant, with a cold and indifferent attitude. This behavior caused him discomfort, as it reminded him of when she was young and full of life. However, after losing her mother to the humans, Renee had become a closed and suspicious person, something that Adele felt was a direct consequence of her own inability to change the past. This brought him a weight of guilt, although he knew there was nothing he could do to reverse the situation. It was at this point that a subordinate arrived to summon Adele and Renee to Crete's presence. The patriarch was concerned about Renee's decision to enter the Saitan Academy, a notoriously dangerous school where the kingdom's most promising children were trained. Crete knew that even though Renee had overcome mastery, the academy was a merciless place, and he feared that she would die before she even achieved her revenge against the humans who killed her mother. Crete then made Adele an offer. Renee could go to the academy, but he would have to accompany her as her guard. Renee hesitated, but Crete made it clear that there was no room for negotiation. Adele, surprised by the proposal, didn't understand what he had to do with it. He had no desire to be a guard, and the idea of once again being involved in a dangerous mission made him apprehensive. The Saitan Academy was known for being an extremely dangerous place, located in the demon realm, where the most promising students were trained for ruthless battles. Death was almost guaranteed for anyone without exceptional skills, and many had already died there. For Adele, the idea of accompanying Renee to this place meant putting his life at even greater risk. However, he couldn't fully understand Renee's desire to go to that academy, and wondered what really lay behind her determination. He knew that if she went, he would have to follow her regardless of the dangers. But at the same time, he was suspicious of Crete's real intentions in involving him in this game, especially in relation to his own safety and the poison that still corrupted his body. As he reflected on his options, Adele knew that perhaps the best way to gather strength was there, in the academy. He knew when the big clashes would take place between the academies, and decided to act before he was dragged down by the inevitable events. It was then that he plucked up the courage to make a request to Crete. The patriarch asked if he wanted anything removed, but Adele knew that it wouldn't be possible to investigate or change what was happening, as it had already been left behind. Crete, with a serious expression, said that if the request wasn't difficult, he would listen. He asked Renee to leave the room, and Adele wondered if Crete's daughter really hated the idea of accompanying him so much. At the same time, he wondered about the possibility of receiving some kind of mana elixir, or even an artifact, something that would help him overcome his weakness. Crete, realizing his intentions, explained that this was a treasure of the Barz family, and for this reason, he had left his daughter out of the equation. Crete then reflected on Adele's situation, mentioning that he knew his mana was scarce and that, without help, he would probably die trying to protect his daughter. Therefore, the least he could do would be to help him. Approaching Adele, Crete transferred the power of the Barz family to him, offering him the mana cultivation technique. Adele was shocked to feel the demonic energy flowing through his body, an intensely powerful but also disturbing sensation. Crete explained that an ordinary person would have lost their sanity just by hearing the incantation, but that Adele seemed to be something really interesting. everything. He revealed that, with this technique, the mana acquired would be blessed by the demonic god himself, which would probably be enough for Adele to survive. However, Crete also mentioned that there was something peculiar about Adele. He seemed to be related to one of the 7 deadly sins, and the poison running through his body had been put there to make sure he didn't become a spy. Adele wondered if he really was associated with one of the 7 deadly sins, but quickly dismissed the idea. He couldn't remember being part of anything so significant. In the forest, he practiced and cultivated his mana, a constant effort to master the newly acquired energy. He called out to the demonic god, hoping that by accepting that energy, his human mana would be completely replaced. And it was then that, to his surprise, he heard the demon god's voice, which revealed something unexpected. Adele was a half-breed. He bore the blood of a cursed traitor. Confused, Adele asked what this meant, and the demon god replied cryptically, saying that he was a half-breed because he carried the legacy of a traitor. When Adele questioned whether the god was really telling the truth, he received a cold confirmation: "Yes, I am the god of pride." The god, with an almost cynical tone, asked if Adele intended to die there, but then clarified that, if that were the case, he would have killed him already. The flame burning in Adele's chest seemed to be the same as the one consuming the demonic god. The god then expressed a little sympathy for Adele, suggesting that they were both following the same path, albeit for different reasons. At that moment, a demonic mark appeared on Adele's wrist, indicating that he now possessed the god's power. The god warned him of the danger of losing his composure because of the pride that came with that power. Adele felt a strange weight, knowing that, with the mark, he gained 3 additional lives, and that his body would soon be covered in demonic tattoos similar to this one. The power was real, but it didn't come without its price. Suddenly, Adele noticed someone standing behind him. When he turned around, he found Renee. He wondered how long she had been there and what she had heard, but Renee, with a surprised expression, called him a dark priest. Adele, confused by the choice of words, asked what it meant. The term took him by surprise, and he wondered what Renee had really known about his connection to the demon god. Now, a month had passed since Adele received the demonic mark. He felt that his mana had grown considerably, but it was still less than what he believed to be ideal. His mana was at 135, a significant reduction compared to the 241 he had before. But in a short period of time, he had tripled his mana reserve, which indicated impressive progress. Through his focus and dedication, he was already approaching the power of the 6 human houses and would thus be able to master the hidden domain, which was an important goal. However, something was bothering Adele. Renee was training alone behind him when she could have been in the training center with the others. When he called out to her, she approached him and curtsied, which made him uncomfortable. He thought that perhaps she had misunderstood the situation and saw him as some kind of priest. After all, a man who communicates directly with the demonic god could easily be labeled as such. Adele was worried that if Renee started treating him like a superior, it could cause unwanted rumors in the family. That's why he explained to her that, although the situation was delicate, the treatment between them shouldn't change. He was fulfilling his mission to protect her, and that should be respected. Renee, not fully understanding the situation, made a simple but somewhat unexpected request. She wanted a glass of water. Adele, surprised, asked if she was serious. Renee replied that she wanted to treat him like a servant, since she was tired from training and thirsty. Adele reflected, thinking that this was something typical of the Pride family, a very quick change of attitude. He was used to complying with her requests, so after a moment's thought, he brought her the water. During this time, he thought to himself that he needed to act quickly to gain dominance, but he knew that Renee wouldn't let him go alone. Time was running out, and Adele knew he had to act before the main character crossed into the demon realm. The treasure was crucial to his survival in Saitan, and he needed to make sure everything was in order. That's why he asked Renee about the preparations for his enrollment at the academy. Renee, curious, asked why he was asking, and Adele replied that she would be facing evil human types there. He insisted, asking if she was 100% sure that she had checked everything. He said it wouldn't be good to go over it one more time to make sure he wasn't forgetting something important, as he might need something later. Renee looked at him with an expression of confusion and asked him what he meant by that, saying that she preferred him to get straight to the point. Adele explained more clearly that his concern came from the fact that he was her escort. Renee, suspicious, accused him of lying and asked where he wanted to go, as if he was trying to get away from her. She then asked if he had had enough of her presence, but Adele, with a forced smile, denied it. He explained that it wasn't about that, but about a nearby domain that he was planning to conquer, all for his own safety. Renee thought for a moment and then remembered something she had forgotten. She said that she hadn't warmed up yet and suggested that they go to the domain together so that she could finish her training there. Adele and Renee were now in the domain of the undead, a place steeped in history and mystery, where necromancers had ruled before the war between humans and demons. The domain, now overrun by vengeful soldiers and the undead, was far far from what Renee had imagined. She seemed surprised by the situation, but showed no fear, which pleased Adele. He thought how useful her presence would be at that moment, despite the difficulties their movement together could cause. He also knew that the patriarch would never allow her to go there, so if not for her, then for himself. The excuse that he was protecting her was the best explanation he could give. Renee, for her part, wasn't worried. She revealed that she knew a secret exit from the castle, which surprised Adele. They passed unnoticed, and Adele wondered about Renee's frequent escapes from the castle. They reached the base of the mountains and were soon in front of ruins. While Renee admired the sight, Adele tried to hide what he knew about the Arsene lineage, a lineage he carried in secret. He knew the way to the domain like no one else and was willing to use it. After digging a little, they found the entrance to the domain, a staircase that led to a cemetery. At the bottom was a gloomy chapel, bathed in an eerie light. Adele realized that this was no ordinary domain, but something much more complex, and the hundreds of tombstones confirmed it. Renee seemed excited, unafraid of what was to come. He liked her confidence, but knew that the danger was real. The first undead emerged from the ground, followed by others, and soon a horde of booby-trapped skeletons surrounded them. Renee didn't hesitate. She had imbued her body with power and quickly destroyed the skeletons in front of her. Adele watched in admiration, convinced that having her by his side was the right choice, but he knew that the real challenge lay ahead. Adele commented that there was probably a necromancer behind the horde, controlling the undead. As Renee advanced towards the necromancer, Adele struggled to keep the skeletons away from him. He watched her every move and prepared to back her up. But suddenly something unexpected happened. The skeletons began to revive, confirming the necromancer's presence. The necromancer mocked them, saying that they were brave, but that they would all be eliminated. Renee, without hesitation, looked to Adele for guidance. He explained that they needed to advance towards the necromancer and that he would do his best to clear the way. When one of the skeletons attacked Adele, he cut off the monster's head with ease and told Renee to continue, as he would be using a more efficient method to deal with the enemies. Adele then used his level 2 position transfer skill to transfer the skeletons towards Renee while she faced the necromancer. He had a simple plan to destroy the necromancer's orb. When the orb was broken, the entire undead army would disintegrate. But before he could complete his plan, a large skeleton appeared, challenging him imposingly. Adele knew it wouldn't be that easy, so he watched for the opportunity. Renee, without hesitation, advanced and, with a single blow, destroyed the large skeleton. Adele saw the opportunity and used his position transfer skill to exchange the skeleton's skull for the necromancer's dagger and orb. The necromancer, now desperate, watched helplessly as Adele shattered the orb with a precise blow. The instant the orb shattered, all the skeletons disappeared and the domain fell silent. As they celebrated their victory, one last voice of the necromancer echoed in the room. He was thanking them for something, but Adele couldn't fully understand his words. The protagonist thought that the tragedy that had befallen them had been caused by that necromancer, but at least now, with victory, they could rest in peace. Renee, with a curious expression, asked if there was anything else to do. Adele, with a serious look on his face, replied that yes, it was finally time for the reward. As they searched the place, they found 2 items. The first was the Fang of Darkness, a dagger made of dark steel from the demon realm. The blade had the ability to convert darkness into mana, as well as increasing sharpness and speed in the dark. The second item was the Ring of the Eternal Full Moon, an artifact that absorbed both mana sensitivity and moonlight. Adele examined the items carefully. The dagger, because of its properties, seemed to be extremely useful, especially in dark environments, while the ring didn't seem to have an immediate use for him. He therefore suggested that Renee keep the ring and that he take the dagger himself. Renee agreed without hesitation, but Adele, with an unexpected gesture, approached her, took her hand and put the ring on her finger. Renee was surprised and, for a moment, showed a slight embarrassment, which made Adele wonder why she had reacted the way she had. He wondered if, among demons, the act of putting on a ring had any special significance. With a smile, Adele asked how she was feeling now with the power of the ring. Renee, feeling the energy emanating from the artifact, replied that it was incredible. Adele, pleased with the answer, smiled even more and jokingly mentioned that, now that he had defeated the boss, he would take all the gold. However, before he could make any move, Renee, with a mischievous smile, plunged her sword into the gold and said that she would take it all, but would divide it equally between the two of them, every little coin, without exception. After this little moment of relaxation, they returned to the mansion, where they spent some time training together. After a month, Adele felt that his efforts had paid off. His mana was almost at 1,300, a significant mark, especially considering that this was practically the average in the demon realm. A few days later, Renee and Adele were called by Crete, who, with a serious expression, informed them that the day of her entry into Saitan had finally arrived. He explained that she would be leaving for the capital to join the academy, and asked if they had finished their preparations. They both said yes. Crete, with a firm tone, said that it was just a goodbye, not a final farewell. Renee respectfully bowed to the patriarch, and Adele, with a smile, commented that he would now accompany the young master. Crete, with a slight nod, said that he hoped Adele would succeed in the task ahead of him, and Adele, with a determined expression, replied, "Yes, sir." Soon afterwards, they left for the carriage, where the entourage was ready to set off. The atmosphere was full of anticipation, but Adele couldn't help thinking about his future. He watched Crete from a distance, reflecting on the patriarch, who, although he was someone of few words and rare displays of emotion, probably felt the same way about his daughter Renee as any other father. At the moment, Adele's future was at stake, but for now he knew exactly what his goal was: to succeed in Saitan. As the carriage drove on, the bumpy road made the vehicle shake, and Adele couldn't help but feel a twinge of nervousness. Since they had left the castle, Renee hadn't said a word. The silence between them was beginning to bother him, but it was then that Renee looked at him curiously. As she analyzed him, she thought that, at first glance, he seemed a little suspicious. However, now, after observing him for a while, she found him even cuter than she had imagined. In response to this thought, Adele tried to break the silence by commenting on the weather, saying that it was a nice day. Despite this, Renee couldn't get her mind off the fact that Adele's words and actions seemed to lack weight. He didn't show much strength, either in the physical sense or in terms of raw power. She wondered internally if he really was a priest, as had been said. Noticing that she was staring at him, Adele asked her why she was paying so much attention to him. She quickly reflected that this was rather stupid. Since he had already spoken directly to a demonic god, it was clear that he was a priest, yet the doubt still lingered in her mind. It was then that Renee looked at the ring Adele had put on her finger and had a revelation. The ring signified an eternal vow, something typical when a person of the opposite gender put a ring on someone's finger. This made her wonder what kind of vow Adele had made for her, since he hadn't said much about it before putting the ring on her finger. Intrigued, she still wondered about the intentions behind this gesture. Adele, interrupting their thoughts, told them that they would be arriving in Saitan in about an hour, much sooner than they had expected. He stared at Renee for a moment and said, "Okay," with an expression of doubt. He asked if he had done something wrong. Renee, with a sigh, replied that no, she was just going to take a nap, and asked him to be quiet. Then the room fell silent again as time passed. Eventually they reached the capital, and Adele, observing the city, commented that it was the capital of the demon kingdom. He said that it didn't look very different from the human kingdom. It looked very medieval. He reflected on the differences he noticed around him. The biggest difference between the people of the demons and the humans was their appearance. The horns and the elite demons had tattoos, like that man he saw with the tattoo on his neck. Adele, curious about the next step, asked where they were going now. Renee explained that the test to join the academy would take place in 2 days, and that they needed to register before then. Adele suggested that, with 2 days to spare, they could take a tour of the capital. However, Renee, with a firm tone, said that she didn't have time for that, and that they should register soon. Adele, once again, felt confused by Renee's attitudes. Despite having written about the character, he still couldn't fully understand her. Later, as they walked through the capital, Adele observed the grandeur of Saitan. The city was immense and seemed 3 times larger than an ordinary university. They approached a bald demon who was registering visitors. When Adele approached to register, the inspector, surprised, asked who the hell he was, said he didn't look like a demon, and questioned what a half-demon was doing in a place like that. Adele felt a bad feeling. The inspector continued, mocking him, saying that a bastard like him shouldn't be there. It was at this point that Renee intervened, imposing herself on the situation. When the inspector saw Renee's horns, he commented on her appearance and recognized her as someone from the lineage of the 7 deadly sins. He then demanded that Renee register, asking about the state of her house and her identity. Renee introduced herself as Renee from the Barz house and explained that Adele was her guard. The inspector, still suspicious, questioned whether a half-demon could be a guard, and also commented on the fall of the Barz house, suggesting that Saitan probably shouldn't accept someone from there. Renee angrily warned that any more insults would result in death. The inspector hurriedly apologized and explained that he didn't discriminate against test takers. He then asked for Adele's name and identity. Adele introduced himself as a member of the Pixie family, not the Arsene family, as the inspector had assumed. The inspector, apparently satisfied with the answer, completed the registration and said that the paperwork would be finalized within 2 days. Meanwhile, Adele was reflecting on the war between humans and demons. During the conflict, the half-demons were much stronger than ordinary humans and fought on the side of the humans, which probably explained the hostility towards him now. He then informed Renee that while she was still with the inspector, they could go to the accommodation. Renee and Adele made their way to a simple little house, but clean enough for them to stay in. Renee commented that the place looked very old, and Adele, with with a pragmatic tone, replied that they couldn't do much since they didn't have much money. He thought to himself that with the 10 gold provided by Crete, they wouldn't survive a month, considering the financial situation of the Barz house after the war. However, he concluded that at least they could rest there for the time being. In the simple but already very old inn, Adele asked for a room, planning to stay there for 2 nights. The receptionist, curious, asked if the person next to him would be staying in the same room, and Renee, very embarrassed, hastened to reply that no, they would be separate rooms. She explained that the payment would be for 2 rooms, 2 nights, including meals, totaling 2 gold coins. For Adele, the price seemed reasonable. It wasn't that expensive. Renee quickly said goodbye and told him she was already on her way to her room. Adele politely wished her a good rest and said he would be up shortly with her luggage. He thought to himself that, although she had always lived in large mansions, she would probably quickly get used to this kind of simple accommodation. For the next 2 days, he would also rest, recovering his strength for the test. Finally, on the day of the test, the guards were guiding the applicants, and Adele was surprised to realize how many people were there. Many candidates were present, all with the same goal: to enter Saitan's academy and eventually contribute to the war against humans. Thinking to himself, Adele pondered the situation. So many applicants for the war, precisely to defeat the humans. He had to be careful that his identity wasn't discovered. Then the instructors told them they could board. Adele wondered what this meant, but before he could think any further, a train suddenly appeared, ready to take everyone to their destination. This news took Adele by surprise. It was explained that several dimensional gates, similar to labyrinths, had been set up around Saitan to prevent intruders, and only those who took the train would be able to reach the city. Adele found the system impressive, and as he looked at the huge fortress rising in the background, he realized that it wasn't even the main academy. The fortress must have been gigantic. They soon arrived, and the messenger directed them to follow the queue, and they were all welcomed into a large hall. Adele was impressed by the place, which seemed colossal. The vast majority of the applicants were young demons, and he wondered if other children of the 7 deadly sins were present. He also realized that the people dressed in black overcoats were probably the teachers, and thought that if he made a good impression, his life would be much easier. But soon, a voice cut through the silence, and someone declared that time was up. The doors locked and the lights went out. Adele felt a chill, wondering if this was some kind of magical effect. He didn't know what to expect from the test, but before he could think any further, a woman appeared and asked for silence. She introduced herself as Principal Lucian and greeted them harshly, calling them brainless idiots. She informed them that many of them were destined to die that year, and that soon the real test would begin. A crushing pressure settled in the room. The participants could hardly breathe, and many collapsed, succumbing to the physical and mental pressure. One of the teachers commented in a serious tone that the principal was not in a good mood that day, but that the test was crucial. The accompanying teacher observed that it didn't matter how physically strong someone was. If they didn't have the mental stamina, they would fall in front of the principal. The test was then explained. Lucian personally supervised the first stage, called the mental endurance test. The aim was to see if the candidates could withstand intense interrogation and keep their secrets in case they were captured by humans during the war. The professor mentioned that 5 minutes had passed, and almost no one was still standing. When the pressure finally stopped, Adele and Renee were the only ones left standing. The teacher noted that only 8 people had survived to the end, but that she had expected more. The teacher, trying to console her, commented that, compared to the last editions, the number of survivors was actually good. He also mentioned the rumors that some children of the 7 deadly sins were taking part in the test, and it seemed that the rumors were true. However, he was intrigued by the fact that Adele was still standing. Although he wasn't one of the 7 sins, he surprised everyone. The teacher commented that Adele had lasted almost 10 minutes, but that she probably wouldn't last much longer. The test would continue and she still had high hopes, but suddenly, something unusual happened. An evil aura formed around Adele, surprising everyone present. That dark presence made the teachers and the principal shiver. The teacher thought that Adele represented a great danger and that he needed to be eliminated immediately. However, before this could happen, an extremely powerful murderous intent emerged from Adele. The pressure was far more intense than any ruthless murder. Adele watched the scene carefully as the pressure increased, and the teacher tried to deal with the situation, but was immediately interrupted by Principal Lucian's gaze. She stared at him with an intensity that made the teacher step back, as if silently telling her to leave him. Even though he was nervous, the teacher knew he couldn't intervene any further, and Lucian, without any change in her expression, seemed to take advantage of the situation with an enigmatic smile. Adele, trying to withstand the test, wondered how much longer he could stand. With the overwhelming mental pressure, he knew he would soon fall, so he decided to use his killing intent. He concentrated all his aura around his body, causing his strength to intensify, and surprisingly, this kept him steady. However, when the principal announced that she was going to increase the intensity of the test, Adele began to feel his powers fading. The murderous aura that had been his salvation disappeared with time. The principal seemed impressed by what he had done, but didn't seem seem willing to let him off easily. Over time, Adele's strength began to wane, but he was able to observe the other participants. Renee was still standing, looking surprisingly well, and the other 6 children of the 7 deadly sins were also standing firm. Baltan, Prone, Samuel, Aaron, and Guar, the heirs of envy, lust, gluttony, sloth, and greed, were all withstanding the test well. Adele, however, thought about how each of these characters had a lot of potential, but they were all destined to die at the hands of the main character, including Renee. It was then that he came across the last person to catch his eye. She had long white hair, glowing red eyes, and a tiara of thorns that shone with a menacing aura. Adele immediately recognized the young woman's presence. She was the demon lord, heir to wrath, Diana, the greatest villain of the demon empire. Her power and presence were unmistakable. When the test finally came to an end, the teacher and the principal discussed the candidates' performance. Many of those who failed began to rebel, questioning the instructors and talking about who their parents were. One of the young people who protested was immediately controlled by the teacher, who grabbed him by the face and reproached him severely. He said that he didn't care what his father did, and that all that mattered was what he himself was capable of doing. As punishment, everyone who hadn't lasted even 5 minutes was dismissed. The doors closed behind them, and relief washed over those who had passed. For a moment, Adele felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. He knew that the mental endurance test had only just begun, and that his journey was far from over. He observed the scenery around him and realized that, despite Saitan's severity, he was lucky to have passed the test. However, he knew that now he would have to be even more cautious, as few managed to advance to the second phase. Amid the murmurs of the other applicants, Adele noticed that Renee seemed to be quite famous, and all the children of the 7 deadly sins had their share of attention. Curiously, no one seemed to be paying much attention to him, which in a way relieved him. Not attracting attention was advantageous, but he also knew that sooner or later, both the instructors and the principal would remember his presence. When Professor Aries introduced himself, everyone's attention was quickly drawn. He was the instructor in charge of teaching and guiding all the applicants. Aries seemed to carry a menacing aura, as if he was always ready to draw a dagger and eliminate anyone who dared to challenge him. He congratulated everyone who had passed on to the next stage and explained that the mental endurance test was not just a question of physical strength, but a way of assessing the candidate's mental sanity. After all, many could be captured by humans during the war and tortured, and the test served to check whether they could withstand interrogation without breaking. Aries, with a calculating smile, revealed that the 8 applicants who had held out for more than 10 minutes would earn additional points, and that if they continued to perform well in the next phase, they could gain access to Saitan's weapons depot. This caused a buzz among the applicants. Adele felt that this was a great opportunity to stand out even more, and began to think about how he could take advantage of it. Aries explained the second part of the test. In this phase, the applicants would need to demonstrate their skills, talents, and weapons, with the aim of showing what they could use against humans. Each person's class would be assigned based on the type of talent and weapon each participant possessed. Adele reflected on what he could do to impress, and more importantly, he began to wonder how he would stand up to the humans who were being mentioned. Aries made a gesture with his hand, and as part of the invocation, a revived spirit appeared before everyone. He was a swordsman of war, and his presence seemed like a warning to all the candidates. They would have to face this being to prove their strength. Adele was deeply shocked to see the presence of Ninai Cell, the most powerful hero of the 6 great human families. It seemed completely unexpected, something so random that he couldn't understand it. Renee, noticing Adele's bewilderment, asked him if he knew who that person was, and Adele, without hesitation, confirmed that he knew very well. Ninai Cell, head of the Ninai house, had been a great ally of the protagonist in the original story. He was, in fact, the protagonist's father, known as the Saint of the Sword, a legendary figure who had single-handedly developed an immense talent. All the other demons also recognized him as the Saint of the Sword, and that put them on their guard. Adele immediately realized how serious the situation was. He and his companions were about to be eliminated right there. It wasn't just him who knew the Saint of the Sword. After all, this hero had defeated powerful demons throughout his career. Aries then said that he didn't expect everyone to stand in front of the Saint of the Sword, so he would only use 10% of his power. If he used his full strength, there would be no chance for anyone. Renee wondered if 10% wasn't too much, and in response, Adele explained that even with only a fraction of its strength, the Sword Saint would still be a monstrosity capable of destroying an entire city. He wondered how the Academy expected them to pass that test. Adele began to think about the situation and concluded that there must be some secret condition for passing. If he had the money, he would buy the information on the parchment, but he didn't have enough resources. Aries, sensing Adele's doubts, commented that at the level they were at, they wouldn't be able to defeat the Saint of the Sword alone, so they would form groups of 8. The contestants who passed the first test, after resisting for 10 minutes, would be divided up strategically, with some being grouped with other people who passed, while the rest would be randomly distributed. Adele realized that these groups would probably be made up of the 7 descendants of the deadly sins, with himself as their leader. All eyes were on Renee, but curiously, no one wanted to stay with Adele. Renee, noticing his discomfort, encouraged him to pass the test and leave the place safely. Adele, for his part, also wished her well. Soon, the groups were organized. Adele would lead Group 33, made up of Kina, Chris, and Sanchez. He didn't recognize these names, so he assumed that they were secondary characters from the original story. When he introduced himself, Adele was greeted with curious looks. Chris, with light hair, Kina, a blonde, and Sanchez, who didn't even look at Adele, made up his team. Sanchez, clearly uncomfortable, commented that having a half-demon as their leader was a disgrace to their home. Adele, visibly irritated, replied that not even the members of his team respected him, and questioned how this could be a disgrace for Sanchez's family, considering that he wasn't even a direct descendant. Adele, with his usual pragmatism, suggested that everyone do their best and start presenting their skills. Chris went first, revealing his mana transformation ability. He could create a prism of mana and convert it into armor or a sword, of versatile power, but not particularly lethal. Adele found it interesting, but it wasn't impressive. Kina, for her part, explained that her talent lay in providing support. She was not an expert in direct combat. She could considerably increase her allies' combat speed, although this came at a cost. She became heavier when she activated this power. She asked Adele if he was feeling lighter, and he joked that he was. But the answer didn't seem to be exactly what she expected. Kina wasn't upset, and Adele, explaining that it was just a joke, tried to ease the tension. Adele, however, wasn't so optimistic about Kina's abilities, as his power didn't seem strong enough to help them overcome such a challenging test. Finally, Sanchez revealed his ability. He could summon a stone armor that completely enveloped him, making him resistant to attacks. Adele thought he would have the perfect role as the team's tank. When it was Adele's turn to show his skill, he quickly threw an item towards Sanchez and then teleported to the place where the item had fallen. Sanchez, surprised and visibly shocked, was speechless. Adele explained that his ability was teleportation, and with a knife in hand, he prepared to intimidate Sanchez. Everyone was impressed by Adele's ability, and he thought that faced with so many variables and surprises at the academy, he still had a lot to learn, so he wouldn't reveal all the details of his capabilities. Adele then organized the formation of the group. Chris and Sanchez, with their defensive skills, would be at the front, he would be in the middle, while Kina would provide support at the back. The group agreed on the position, and when Ares announced that the second phase of the test was about to begin, Adele realized that the other participants really hated humans. Just facing a sword saint, who wasn't even really there, people seemed seized by a deep hatred, ready for battle with eyes full of determination. The sword saint, with his menacing aura, prepared his attack, and in an instant, knocked down the 4 students from the previous group with ease, without giving them the slightest chance to defend themselves. They barely had time to react before they fell to the ground, paralyzed, unable to move. The only reason they weren't killed immediately was that the Academy didn't want that to happen. Adele watched the scene with concern and wondered, surprised, if that was really only 10% of the Sword Saint's power. Ares, unperturbed, called the second group, which suffered the same fate. In a few seconds, they were effortlessly defeated. Anna, from the group that followed, was terrified. With each group that fell, her confidence in their chances of victory diminished. The fourth group, seeing what had happened, admitted that there was no way they could challenge the Sword Saint. Ares asked if the other groups were also going to give up. Baltan, with a determined tone, said that yes, they would try one more time. Adele wondered if Baltan would really go. This test was getting more and more interesting. Chris, restless, asked if they really needed to take part in this test, and Adele replied that it wasn't really about winning, it was about resisting. The fourth group faced the Sword Saint, but quickly lost 2 members, who were crushingly defeated. Adele then realized that the Sword Saint was using his aura divided into 2 parts, probably to test the limits of the combatants. Sanchez, still visibly tense, wondered if they could really beat such a powerful creature, and Chris, trembling with fear, seemed to doubt his own strength. However, Sanchez, despite his questioning, was also afraid, his body trembling with the anticipation of what was to come. Group 5 was decimated just as easily, followed by Groups 9 and 10, all of whom failed to even scratch the Sword Saint. When Group 30 arrived, Adele thought to himself that no group so far had even managed to land a blow. It was as if the Sword Saint was an invincible, unbeatable enemy. However, the impossible happened. The Sword Saint's first blow was blocked by someone. Adele thought that, as more groups faced the Sword Saint, they would seem stronger, more determined. But before long, they were all defeated too. too. Sanchez, in a nervous voice, said that it would soon be their turn. Chris, still visibly afraid, seemed increasingly anxious. Adele then had an idea. He had discovered the real key to passing the second test. It wasn't beating the Saint of the Sword, but showing determination and resilience. The criteria for the test was simple but brutal. Even if you were defeated by an overwhelming force, the aim was to get up and carry on. Adele remembered how some competitors had passed, only to fail the test soon after. But they had one thing in common: persistence. It was a test to measure the ability to endure. Adele's group of 33 would be the next to face the Saint of the Sword. They knew they were scared, but they were motivated. Adele was convinced that, with his team's talent, they would be able to resist him, even if he was only a half-demon. The greatest villain in history was nothing compared to their willpower. What mattered, after all, was determination. The team prepared for the test, and Adele thought about how he didn't know much about the sky, but his father had always told him not to be nervous and to concentrate on the established positions. When the Sword Saint prepared his attack, his aura was so sharp that it shattered Chris's shield with a single touch. Immediately, Adele shouted to Kina, asking her to protect Chris from the fall. Kina quickly managed to reduce the impact of his fall. Adele then gave the command for Sanchez to hold the next blow, and he managed for a while to resist the pressure of the attack. As he watched, Adele noticed something important: an opening in the Sword Saint's attacks. But it wasn't a normal opening. It was so obvious that his instincts told him not to attack. He wondered what was going on. Was it possible that the Sword Saint was being controlled by some kind of artificial intelligence? Or was it something else? Adele then ordered everyone back to their original positions. The next blow was coming, and Chris's shield was already badly damaged, almost breaking completely. Sanchez was also struggling to stay on his feet. Adele told them to hold on a little longer, as the opportunity would soon arise. When the blow came, the opening appeared again. This time, Sanchez barely managed to block it, and, in desperation, said that if they continued in that way, they would end up dead. He asked what Adele was waiting for. Adele calmly replied that they just had to hold out a little longer. He thought that, despite everything, his team was the only one to hold out for more than one blow, something that no other group had managed to do. The Sword Saint was apparently repeating the same moves. It was as if he was testing something, perhaps his resilience. Finally, Adele made a decision. He would change his position. Chris was on the ground, and Adele asked him if he was okay. He knew it was difficult, but he needed to trust him one last time. Sanchez, confused, asked if Adele was planning to attack again, and Adele revealed that he had a plan. He was going to drive his blade straight into the Sword Saint's throat. Even his team was startled by this. The Sword Saint, however, prepared another blow, and Sanchez positioned himself to block. This time, Adele ordered Sanchez to hold the blow alone, without the aid of Chris's shield. When the attack came, Sanchez was thrown away, just as Adele had planned. He switched positions with Sanchez at the last second, dodging the blow and taking Sanchez's place with his blade ready. Now Adele had the chance to strike a fatal blow. When he advanced to hit the Sword Saint, everyone was stunned. But what happened next was unexpected. The Sword Saint, even without his sword, was fighting masterfully and landed a powerful knee to Adele's stomach. He felt the intense pain, but thanks to the mana barrier created by Chris, he managed to survive the blow. If it hadn't been for that, Adele knew it would have been fatal. Adele, after failing in his attempt to finish him off, came up with a quick move. He managed to trap the Sword Saint inside the darkness, completely disorienting him and making the opportunity to attack even more promising. Even in the darkness, the Saint seemed to have supernatural vision and, with a quick dodge, deflected the fatal blow that Adele had tried to deliver. Without wasting any time, the Sword Saint came at Adele with a devastating punch, and he finally realized that he was dealing with a real monster. However, Adele was not unarmed. He had a plan prepared inside the darkness. Using the Eye of Superbia, he summoned his special ability, Widell's Rain of Black Knives, and fired a series of razor-sharp blades straight at the back of the Sword Saint's head. Each knife was a precise and deadly blow, striking the opponent's body at the same time. Outside, the tension was at its peak. Ares, watching the fight, commented that it looked like everything was coming to an end. When the darkness finally cleared, everyone could see the Sword Saint lying on the ground, defeated. Adele had achieved the impossible. The feeling of silence that followed was almost magical, and Adele thought that this was one of the most satisfying moments he had ever experienced. Baltan, with unusual lightness, commented that the fight had been a lot of fun to watch. Adele's group, now relieved, began to celebrate, but Crew, curious, asked how he had managed to beat the Saint of the Sword. Adele, with sincere humility, replied that it was thanks to teamwork. He then turned to ask about Sanchez, and Kina, visibly worried, informed him that he was in shock and that the instructors had taken him to recover. Adele felt a sense of relief, knowing that his friend would be okay. When he asked if the test was finished, the others began to question it, as the sword saint was on the ground. Adele once again began to move the body of the saint of the sword, dismembering him to make sure he was really dead. Chris, with a confused expression, asked what he was doing, and Adele explained that he needed to make sure his opponent died. Aries, watching everything with a serious expression, remained silent, while Prone critically commented that for a half-blood, Adele wasn't so bad. She then made a provocative remark, saying that he, being a hybrid with human blood, was inferior. But before she could continue, she felt a powerful aura, which quickly made her shut up. It was Renee's presence, and Prone immediately realized that she was from the Barz family. Prone's perception changed completely from one of provocation to a cautious recognition of Renee's strength. With that, the whole group realized that the heirs were there, in a real battle of intimidation, and Prone's group clearly believed that she would be the winner. However, Prone also began to admit internally that Renee seemed to be much more powerful than he had imagined. The next group would be Renee's, and Adele found himself lost in thought about the intensity of her aura and what was going on. But before he could go any further, Professor Aries approached Adele and with an enigmatic tone asked him if he knew what was going on. Adele, with a slight smile, replied that he did. Aries commented that from that moment on he would have to keep an eye on Adele, which took the young man by surprise. He was expecting praise or recognition, but that wasn't exactly what happened. Now, as well as dealing with his own situation, he had to keep an eye on Renee and the silent battle that was unfolding between her and Prone. The fight seemed imminent. Adele, still trying to process everything, began to realize that there was more to Prone than he had imagined. She was a formidable warrior with piercing blue eyes, long white hair, and even oni horns, a feature that could not be ignored. Prone seemed to be expecting something from Adele, something he didn't yet understand. When Prone suddenly faced him and called him a half-breed, he was perplexed. Barz, she teased him, asking him to become her slave, but before he could respond, Renee went after Prone, furious. The fight almost escalated right there, but Aries quickly intervened, reminding everyone that unnecessary fighting was forbidden in Saitan. Prone, now visibly flustered, blocked Renee's attack, and Adele felt reassured that Aries had prevented a major problem. If the fight between the Seven Sins took place during the entrance ceremony, the consequences would be enormous. As everything calmed down, Prone, now trembling, reflected on Renee's strength. Adele, with a slight smile, asked if his little lady was all right, and reminded her that her group would be the next to fight. Renee, with a gentle gesture, wiped the sweat from Adele's face and congratulated him on a job well done. Prone, with a challenging tone, asked what kind of relationship there was between the two of them, suggesting that perhaps she was seeing a half-demon. Adele, in thought, realized that he was being treated more respectfully now that he had passed the test. Renee asked Adele if he was hiding his strength on purpose, if he was playing weak. On reflection, Adele thought that he had indeed used all his strength during the test, but Renee's impression was that he was hiding something. Perhaps she still saw him only as a family priest, which was a big mistake for him. Prone approached and asked Adele to say his name. When he introduced himself, Prone commented that it wasn't a bad name, but made it clear that she had other plans. Using some kind of spell, she tried to get Adele to submit, but he adamantly refused, stating that he was already engaged to his Mrs. Renee. Surprised, Prone realized that her spell wasn't working. She then wondered if she was being ignored, but Adele stood his ground. He was curious about Renee's power and Prone's real intentions. He wanted to see how far Renee could go, and his expectations of her were higher than ever. As everyone watched, Renee slowly approached the Sword Saint. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and everyone knew that something great was about to happen. The intimidation was so intense that it seemed as if the very atmosphere around them was suffocating with anticipation. Aries, watching intently, wondered what Renee would do, but it soon became clear to everyone that the battle would begin at a moment's notice. Renee and the Sword Saint faced each other fiercely, a silent exchange of intentions. However, after just a few seconds, the fight was decided. Renee, with one swift and precise movement, cut the Sword Saint in half without hesitation. The speed and precision of her blow were so impressive that no one could fully follow the action. When Adele looked back, he saw the Sword Saint slowly falling, already defeated. As the saint died, the others watched in silence. Soon, the atmosphere was filled with celebrations on Renee's behalf. Aries, with a slight smile, commented that the blow had been effective, leaving no room for doubt. Adele, impressed, noticed that there had hardly been time to see the blow. Renee had been so quick that victory was practically instantaneous. He realized, however, that the Sword Saint had already identified the difference in power between him and Renee, which explained his reluctance to attack as she approached. Prone, with a slightly disappointed tone, commented that it would be a shame not to see Renee ridiculed by the Saint of the Sword. It seemed that Renee was much more capable than Prone had imagined. Adele, curious, asked if she thought the children of the Seven Sins, if they were all together, could defeat the true Saint of the Sword. Prone, with a skeptical expression, replied that, of course, that wouldn't be possible. None of them would be able to, not even together. She suggested that perhaps an ancient demon king might have a chance. But Adele, with a more realistic analysis, commented that even if the children had resisted only 10% of the Sword Saint's power, that was already a remarkable achievement. Prone, for his part, refuted this, saying that the Sword Saint was just a cheap copy and didn't even possess 10% of the original's power. Adele reflected on this as he looked out over the battlefield. He remembered the difficulties he had faced when fighting that simulated Sword Saint, an opponent who possessed at most a fraction of real power. It was a difficult battle, and he realized that despite being the creator of that world and history, he still knew almost nothing about the demon realm. Anxiety and anticipation grew inside him, but he hoped that everything would work out. Now, only the Seven Sins remained. All the other participants had been defeated during the test, and the true strength among the Seven Heirs was beginning to stand out. The only certainty at that moment was that Diana, the Heir of Wrath, seemed to be the strongest among them. With the fight over, Ares announced that the entrance test had come to an end. He instructed everyone present to move in front of the podium, where the results of the second phase would be announced. The participants who had faced the Saint of the Sword had officially passed, while those who had not taken part had been disqualified. Ares congratulated all those who passed, informing them that they were now officially newcomers to the Saitan Academy. However, he warned them sternly that the journey ahead would be hellish, so difficult that many would think of abandoning the path. Ares then explained that those who had passed should take part in the entrance ceremony in 2 days' time, and that the 8 people who had defeated the Saint of the Sword should remain where they were. Renee, with a curious look on her face, asked why exactly they had to stay there. Adele, with an enigmatic smile, explained that it was the reward mentioned in the first phase. Ares added that they had all done very well, so they would have the right to enter Saitan's armory, where they could choose their weapons. Baltan, with his usual interest in competition and resources, asked a direct question. Could they get out of there with a weapon? He knew that Saitan's weapons were powerful. Adele, watching, thought about how Baltan never missed an opportunity to explore everything around him, just as he had written in his original story. Ares, in a practical way, replied that if they focused on several weapons, they could leave with only one of them, and as time was short, he wouldn't answer any more questions at that moment. Ares led the group to the armory. He approached an ancient door and, with a simple gesture, activated a magic circle to open it. He explained that this was a rare and valuable opportunity, and that, for many, the entrance might seem more like a prison than an armory. Ares ordered everyone to enter one by one, in reverse order of their ranking in the second test, and informed them that everyone would be inspected on their way out. Adele realized that, as the last to qualify, he would be the last to enter. This meant that Baltan would go first. Baltan, wasting no time, announced that he would choose the best item. Ares, impatient, ordered him to keep quiet. Renee, for her part, commented that she would take an artifact, since she already had a weapon. As for Adele, he also thought about getting something similar. He soon realized that they all seemed to have the same goal, which made him wonder if there would be anything really useful left for him in the end. Time passed, and Baltan came out of the armory holding a crown, a magical artifact, as he had said he would. Adele noticed that everyone was leaving with powerful items, and began to wonder if armor was the only option left for him. Renee then approached and informed him that it was his turn. Adele commented on the bracelet she had chosen, complimenting it, and asked what exactly it did. Renee explained that he would find out when he entered, as there were descriptions inside the armory for each item, although some items had no description at all. Adele wondered what the absence of these descriptions meant. Could it be that the items without descriptions had no value at all? He found that hard to believe. There must be something hidden in these objects. Ares then said that Edel was the last to enter, and if he had any questions, that was the time to ask. Adele took the opportunity to ask why some items had no description and what exactly he should do with them. Ares explained that the only way to find out what these items did was to test them. Oder, one of the other heirs, raised a question and asked if this meant that no one had discovered the full potential of these artifacts before. Ares confirmed this, explaining that if Adele was lucky, he could find an item that suited him, offering incredible abilities. However, if he was unlucky, he could end up suffering a curse for the rest of his life. Ares then impatiently asked Adele to come in soon. Adele reflected on his position as the last one and thought that maybe it wasn't so bad. He passed through cramped but well-lit corridors until he came to a large room filled with items and artifacts that glowed brightly. He was impressed by the vastness and variety of the objects in front of him. Soon he found a spear that stood out, the Spear of Twin Fangs. The description said that it had been used by an unnamed demon to hunt snakes and that the vengeful spirits of dead snakes resided within it. When infused with mana, 2 snakes formed. Adele concluded that the item would be of no use to him, as he already had his daggers and wasn't interested in another weapon. He then came across the Starlight Crystal, an item that glowed like a crystal sphere imbued with starlight. It had been used by an astrologer in the past and, when fed with mana, could emanate starlight to illuminate the environment. Adele reflected that this item would not be useful to him either, as it controlled the element of darkness, and at most he could use it as a torch. He continued his search until he found an empty space, apparently already used. This item was the Great Diadem of the Victor, an artifact that granted the wearer exceptional recuperative abilities and physical endurance, remaining at its owner's side until death. Adele recognized that this was the item Baltan had picked up. He remembered that in his history he had discarded certain artifacts, but never imagined that he would find one of them there. Adele realized that the most valuable artifacts had already been taken away by the other participants, such as the Python's bond, the Demon General's flag, and the fallen nobleman's insignia. He knew that now there was nothing left of obvious value to him. The members of the group, known as the 7 Deadly Sins, had taken the best options, and most of the remaining weapons and armor would be of no use to him. In the end, however, he found a nondescript sword. Thinking there was no other choice, he decided to take this cursed artifact, which seemed to have no further use. But he remembered that he still had the scroll of information. Adele used the parchment and asked for a description of the sword. However, he knew that he would have to pay for this information. The cost was 100 gold coins. Adele began to notice a pattern as he explored the artifacts. He passed several items and asked for information about them, and noticed that the cost of obtaining the description varied. When he came across a low-priced item that cost just 1 gold coin, he discovered that it could turn the owner's luck into someone else's misfortune. Although this sounded interesting, he didn't consider the item useful and continued exploring. He paid 100 gold coins for one item and then 50 for another, but none of them piqued his interest. There were only 2 items left. The first had a mythical rank, and its description cost 300 gold coins. Adele thought about paying to find out what it did, but then he remembered an item that had already caught his attention, a necklace that made him feel a strange sensation, as if he were being watched. He decided to investigate this item with the scroll, but the answer was surprising. The scroll glowed brightly, and the information could only be revealed if it offered the power of a god. Adele realized that the necklace was legendary, and immediately felt that his luck was at risk, as he didn't have enough power to obtain the description. He tried infusing some mana into the necklace, but it had no effect. Frustrated, he considered giving up on the item, but his instincts told him to take it. So, even without knowing what it did, but believing it to be a valuable artifact, Adele decided to keep the necklace. When he opened his status window, he realized that a new unknown effect had been activated, although he still didn't know what it meant. Adele, relaxed by the time he had left, decided to explore the place further. As he left, Ares approached him, curious about the necklace. Adele explained that it was a nondescript item, and Ares, with a serious look on his face, revealed that it was one of the cursed artifacts. He suggested that Adele should know something about the necklace, but Adele, confused, said that he had no idea about the nature of the item. Ares then remained silent, watching him intently, which made Adele wonder if Ares hated him for being there at the academy. Ares finally said that he believed in him as the academy's instructor, and that Saitan should trust his cadets. He reminded Adele to take good care of the artifacts he had acquired, because in difficult times, they could be the key to saving their lives. Adele reflected on the fact that, while everyone there except him was destined to lead the demon realm, there was a huge investment behind each of their futures. Although he had already obtained a valuable artifact, he still wondered if he could really survive in that environment. Ares then announced that everyone was dismissed and that they would meet again at the entrance ceremony. Adele had planned to return to the dormitory with Renee, but was interrupted by Baltan, who called out to him. Baltan apologized for his rudeness the first time they met and introduced himself, praising Adele for the impressive way he fought. Baltan shook his hand, which, although unexpected, was something Adele interpreted as a kind of approval. However, Baltan squeezed his hand too hard, and this caught the attention of Ares, who watched in silence and wondered and thought what this sudden behavior really meant. Baltan, with his typical arrogance and contempt for the weak, watched Adele with an expression of envy and greed. He was the kind of person who only cared about the strong and, in his nature as a combat-addicted lunatic, seemed to see in others only opportunities to test his strength. When Baltan approached Adele and asked what was wrong, insinuating that he seemed to be suffering, Adele replied calmly, without paying much attention to the provocation, and commented that there were other people around. Soon after, her, he switched places with Baltan's sword, using his skill, and said bluntly that the test was over and that everyone was tired. Baltan, sensing the implicit challenge, replied that he hadn't realized how exhausted he was, but quickly revealed his true intention. He wanted to fight Adele to the death. Adele, however, made it clear that he had no intention of fighting at that moment, which prompted Renee to intervene. She placed herself between the two and, sword in hand, said that if Baltan wanted to fight her guard, he would have to face her too. Baltan, always unflappable, refused the fight, saying that taking on two at once would be too much, and suggested that it would be better if they didn't get hurt before school started. He ended the conversation with a simple "see you next time." Adele, observing the situation, thought to himself that Baltan was a real nutter. He could hardly believe the incoherence of his words, saying he didn't want to get hurt, but at the same time proposing a fight to the death. Adele realized that he was dealing with an unpredictable psychopath who was impossible to read. Renee then suggested that they leave straight away, and this made Adele reflect that, although it had only been a day, it already felt like several days had passed. He was beginning to understand what his life in Saitan would be like, full of confrontations and constant surprises. A few days later, Adele was enjoying a rest in the sun, feeling that his body was much stronger than before. He knew that the hardships he had faced had contributed to this, and he was now looking forward to trying on the uniform the academy had sent him. The uniform was more comfortable than he had imagined, and he realized that for the next 3 years, he wouldn't be able to wear anything but it. Despite this, he found the fabric practical and functional, something that could help him a lot in everyday life. Curious about how Renee was doing in her uniform, Adele went to her door and knocked. When she was allowed in, she was already dressed, carefully adjusting her uniform. Adele, sincerely impressed, said that she looked very nice, which made Renee extremely embarrassed. She asked if he was going somewhere, and Adele, without understanding why she was so shy, thought that she really did have an unexpectedly cute side. They chatted for a while about the weather and the day, and Adele commented that the weather was really beautiful, but then he remembered that he still had chores to do. That's when Renee, with a watchful eye, asked him if he didn't have something to do, like guarding her. Wasn't that his job? Adele, a little embarrassed, remembered his role as guard and confirmed that he should indeed accompany her. Renee then prepared to leave too and wondered how long he would stand there staring at her. Adele finally realized that it was time to leave, although he had enjoyed the conversation and the moment of rest. Later, in the city, Adele was struck by the vibrant and clean life around him. The city seemed at peace, and it was hard to believe that a war had devastated everything just 10 years earlier. Rebuilding had been swift, and it seemed that the humans had won the war even though they had failed to take the demon capital. Renee, with her appetite already whetted, said she wanted something to eat, and Adele, without hesitation, agreed. They approached a vendor who was preparing skewers of venison seasoned with vegetables, and Adele ordered 2. The taste was excellent, juicy and delicious, which surprised Adele to see how someone as serious as Renee could make such a genuine expression of pleasure when eating something simple. He began to notice that, little by little, she was opening up to him more. As they walked together through the city, talking about their experiences, and Adele enjoying the tranquility of that rare moment. However, when they came across a large statue in the center of the city, he was curious to know who it represented, and Renee explained that it was the first demon king. When he heard this, Adele, with a smile on his face, noticed a resemblance to Diana, a strange feeling that he couldn't ignore. Adele was stunned when he saw the statue's eyes light up, and a stream of mana flowing towards the necklace he was wearing. It was as if something invisible and powerful was calling out to him. He watched in astonishment as the jewels in the necklace shone brightly, and, for a moment, wondered if he was hallucinating. Renee, next to him, didn't seem to notice anything, and asked what was going on, as he was clearly shocked. Adele tried to understand what he had just seen, but it was clear to him that the necklace was somehow linked to the power of the statue of the first demon king. Even though he knew that the necklace was a legendary artifact connected to a divine power, Adele still had no idea how to use this power. The fact that the necklace had reacted to the statue's energy made it clear that something much bigger was at play. He promised himself that he would investigate it later, but for now, his priority was just to get back to the dormitory. The doubts and the feeling that there was something great behind that necklace didn't leave his head. The next day, during the entrance ceremony at the academy, the tension was evident in the air. The auditorium was packed with students and instructors, and the principal, who was a child with mysterious tattoos, drew a lot of attention from everyone. Adele inwardly found the situation funny. Her presence was imposing, but at the same time, he considered her a strange and disconcerting figure. When the principal looked directly at him with an unusual intensity, Adele wondered if she had some kind of mind-reading ability, because she seemed to know exactly what he was thinking at that moment. When the ceremony really began, the tension increased even more with the speech about the oath of the best cadet and the second second best. The atmosphere became heavy, especially for people like Renee, who were there for personal reasons and not for competition. When Baltan pointed at Adele with a psychotic smile, Adele thought about ignoring him, but knew that Baltan was just waiting for the chance to create more chaos, as he always did. The ceremony continued with the oath, and the anger of some cadets could be felt in the air, especially among those who had their families destroyed by the humans. For Adele, the most important thing was to keep his identity hidden, as the arson family could become a target. Meanwhile, Renee became more and more distant, even with him by her side, since even though he was her guard, she didn't want to seem dependent on him. When Adele found out that she had been placed in Class C, he was upset, but tried not to show it, as he didn't want to seem to care too much. The situation became more tense when Samuel, the heir of gluttony, bumped into him. With a look full of anger, Samuel clearly wanted to pick a fight, but Adele wasn't interested in that. He apologized, but he knew that Samuel was just trying to provoke him, and he wondered if all the children of the seven sins were like that, crazy and unpredictable. The tension remained firm, since Adele's class was full of people with their own ambitions and explosive temperaments. He began to wonder how difficult his life there in Saitan would be, especially with people like Baltan and Samuel around. While Adele was trying to deal with this new reality, a meeting between the principals and teachers was taking place, the instructor showing irritation that no one believed the seriousness of the situation. But Aries, with his experience, seemed to understand it better. He suggested that he should be responsible for dealing with the dangerous child, but the principal, with a firm look, asked the instructor to sit down, making it clear that the situation was more complex than it seemed. The meeting began with the principal questioning why Aries wanted to change class, and he explained that he wanted to train Adele personally, as he had met him several times in battles, and found Adele to be an unusual person with a dangerous nature. Aries believed that Adele, even at a young age, had the potential to be a threat to anyone, and therefore needed to be closely monitored. According to Aries, Adele possessed the ability to kill without hesitation, which is why he didn't trust leaving him without proper supervision. He believed that he could contain Adele's dark side, and that the boy needed to be in a more restrictive environment. Other instructors questioned this decision. One of them suggested that Aries was being too cautious because Adele was half demon, while another instructor commented that Adele was still weak and insignificant compared to the other students. However, Aries disagreed with everyone, stating that strength was not the only factor to be analyzed, since Adele's self-control and coolness were more dangerous, as he could attack at any time if provoked. Aries pointed out that Adele was capable of facing even one of the seven sins, and therefore needed constant vigilance, which justified his intention to change classes to train him personally and in a more restrictive manner. Instructor Idea, however, questioned Aries about his intentions and asked why he was speaking as if he didn't trust her as an instructor. Aries acknowledged that he had expressed himself badly and apologized, but this didn't prevent the discomfort. Idea, visibly annoyed, demanded to be treated more professionally and not like a child. Lucian intervened and said that he understood their concerns, but the classes had already been assigned, and the change wouldn't make much sense. Even so, he suggested that Idea watch Adele more closely. And with that, the meeting was closed and all the instructors went to their respective classes to continue monitoring the students. Adele, for his part, was worried as he had been placed in the same class as Prone, who was looking at him suspiciously, and he would also have to live with Samuel, who was already showing anger. Prone, with a provocative tone, asked if Adele had followed her there, and Idea intervened by explaining that the classes had been drawn by lot, but Prone, always sarcastic, mocked the situation by saying that Adele would have the privilege of being his slave. Adele felt exhausted inside, but knew he would have to get used to this environment. Samuel, impatient, asked them to stop fighting, and there was almost a scuffle, but Adele realized that this kind of tension would be his new normal from now on. When Idea entered the room and slammed the door, all the students immediately fell silent. She introduced herself firmly and directly, explained that she was the instructor for Class A, and revealed that she was known as the Legion of Calamity, having killed more than 10,000 humans single-handedly. Adele was surprised by this and thought that having such a powerful instructor might increase her chances of survival. Idea didn't beat around the bush and made it clear that her job would be to teach techniques for hunting powerful humans, not demons or demonic beasts as many imagined. For Adele, this represented an exciting challenge. She also explained that the training with magic and weapons would be left to other instructors, as she would only be concentrating on energy training, which worried Adele, as this was one of her greatest weaknesses. The first task was set for the training center, an immense place much larger than a soccer field, with areas dedicated to the use of weapons and magic. Idea, ordered the students to concentrate because the training would begin immediately, with everyone paying attention to what she had to teach. She created a vtex, a portal that appeared in front of the students, and from within it revived soldiers began to appear. Idea explained that they were not real humans, but illusions created by her magic. She also revealed that she had created the Saint of the Sword, a special creation for the first test. Upon seeing this, Adele thought that Idea was a monster, and realized that under her guidance, nothing would be easy. Idea's strength was frightening, and her presence exuded power. The task was simple, but challenging. The students would have to go through the soldiers and reach Idea. After announcing this, she looked at Adele and asked in a teasing tone if he was the one for Adele. Without waiting for an answer, she suggested that he try to attack her as he had done with the Sword Saint. Aiming for his throat, his aura became even more intimidating. But Adele, without hesitation, Idea showed no surprise and answered calmly. Explaining that there was an instructor among the soldiers, acting as their leader, she said that humans always fall when their leaders are defeated, and that if the leader is strong, the followers will be too. So she herself would take on the role of leader of the humans. Scheidel, one of the students, reflected on this and recognized that the strategy made sense, as it was in line with the art of war, which teaches how to subjugate the leader in order to defeat the subordinates. He thought the task would be easy, but Idea soon shattered this illusion, stating that defeating her would be impossible. She made it clear that if anyone could even touch her, they would win the point. The battle began, and Idea threw the human soldiers directly at Adele, but he, using his position transfer ability, moved extremely quickly, appearing behind Idea with the knife already at her throat. The instructor then asked if that meant he had passed the test, and Adele, surprised at his own speed, reflected on how much he had evolved with his skill. However, just when he thought he would succeed, he realized that Idea was protected by a barrier around her body, something he hadn't expected. She revealed that she already knew why they had asked her to keep an eye on him and confirmed that he had passed, but should return to his seat. Adele was confused by the situation and wondered if it was all just hostility or if Idea was just testing his skills out of curiosity. He wasn't sure if they had already found out who he really was, but he knew that somehow he had attracted attention. Idea then turned to the students and asked if they had all seen what Adele had done. She warned that those who failed would have additional lessons, and so the test continued. With the cadets facing the human soldiers, Adele observed that, as they were just ordinary humans with no special powers, the other students were managing to fight, even with some difficulty, and that the real complication would only arise when the instructor was defeated, which seemed unlikely. The tension increased when one cadet was pierced by several spears and another tried to jump over the soldiers, but ended up hit by a shower of arrows and fell to the ground like a porcupine. Adele watched everything carefully and realized that his skill gave him a huge advantage. He thought that, with it, perhaps he could reach the top of his class. Idea then called the next cadet, Samuel, to face the challenge. Adele was curious to know if Samuel's aggressive personality was reflected in his combat style, and it didn't take long to get the answer. Samuel showed his power quickly, covering his own body with intense demonic energy and making his presence overwhelming. He then created a tornado of power that engulfed all the soldiers in front of him. Adele observed that he destroyed the enemies in the blink of an eye and realized that this was the magic of gluttony, a monstrous ability that devours everything around. He concluded that with this power, Samuel would probably secure first place. However, to the surprise of many, Idea did not seem impressed. She wondered why there was so much smoke and noticed that she was practically unharmed, which didn't surprise Adele, because an instructor like her would never be beaten so easily. Idea commented that Samuel's demonstration was powerful, but unfortunately he had failed. So she snapped her fingers, and in an instant, the soldiers returned to the battlefield. She explained that as long as the leader wasn't defeated, the soldiers would continue to appear, and Adele was impressed by how quickly she recreated everything, forming more than 200 enemies in a matter of seconds. Idea acknowledged that Samuel's magic was powerful for a first-year cadet, but said that the end result had been disappointing. Samuel was visibly irritated by the criticism, and, looking at Adele, who maintained his calm smile, he felt even more frustrated. Adele reflected that overconfidence was Samuel's mistake, because if he had focused on eliminating the leader, he would certainly have passed with ease. The tension increased even more when Prone was called. Many believed that, being the daughter of lust, she would have an easy time getting through the challenge. But contrary to what they expected, Prone was visibly nervous, trembling, sweating, and not moving. She seemed completely lost. All, watching from afar, thought that even though she was the daughter of lust, she was not good at direct combat. Her specialty was controlling soldiers like a queen, but without them, she seemed helpless. Prone, completely distressed, turned to Adele and, with tears in her eyes, asked for his help by calling him a slave. This caused a stir among those present, and everyone was surprised by what they had just heard. Many wondered if she had really said that. Adele didn't know how to react. He watched Prone in despair and wondered what she expected him to do. Meanwhile, Idea, showing no patience, sent the soldiers to attack Prone, who was immediately overwhelmed by the blows and began to be hit from all sides. Adele, watching the scene, wondered if Prone couldn't use spells on herself and thought that perhaps there was some specific reason why she didn't use her own powers. At which point he noticed a cadet with a strong healing power and reflected that this kind of ability was normally exclusive to humans. So he began to suspect that this girl might be a half-demon, since few humans were born with this kind of gift. Adele also reflected that healers were a rare class, and so he thought that perhaps it was important to create some kind of connection with that cadet. Even without knowing her name, he felt he needed to get closer to her. Meanwhile, Idea announced that the test was over and told Adele to help Prone up. Adele replied with a simple yes, and even though he didn't think it was the best moment, he went over to Prone, who was clearly injured after the attacks. And in his usual debauched tone, Adele teased her by saying that she should get up. Since the test was over, Prone, furious, complained that he had watched everything and done nothing, and mocked her by saying that he was her slave, or at least that's what she had come to expect from him. Idea then ordered everyone to reconvene and expressed her satisfaction with the results of the test, stating that everyone had done well within what she had expected. She explained that the experience had served to make everyone feel the power they possessed, identify their own mistakes, and understand their own limits. She also pointed out that to become perfect in combat, the demons would need to learn to help each other. This made Adele think about the difference between the Imperial School and Saitan, where the classes were drawn randomly, unlike the organization of the humans, who were separated by power. He concluded that the key to winning in that place would be to find synergy with his colleagues. The instructor then went back to focusing on Adele, the only one who had passed the test, and commented that she was anxious to see how far he could go. Adele replied with his imperturbable smile, saying that he would try hard to live up to expectations, but inside, he felt a certain hostility at her words and wondered why. Even though it seemed like a compliment, Idea's attitude bothered him. He also reflected on Prone's behavior, who constantly tried to pick fights with him and insisted on treating him like a slave, and wondered if he would be able to form his own faction in that place, a doubt that never left his head. Later, during the theory class, the content was a review of the history of the demon realm and human weaknesses. Adele, who already knew most of the subject, found it all a bit boring. The instructor warned that there would be a quiz, so everyone needed to memorize the content. When the class finally ended, Adele threw himself into his chair exhausted. He remembered that, in his past life, he had already graduated, and now he felt defeated on the first day of class. Meanwhile, the other classmates seemed excited, and even surrounded by people. Adele felt alone, as if he were repeating the same loneliness of his previous life. It was then that he saw the girl with the healing power again and thought that this would be a good moment to try to start a conversation. Without hesitating, he got up and walked over to her, but as soon as he introduced himself, everyone around him started looking at him, which made him uncomfortable. He wondered why everyone was looking at him like that and wondered if his presence there really made a difference or if he was just another cadet trying to fit in. Watching the girl attentively, he listened as she said she was happy to meet him and, noticing that she seemed uncomfortable with the attention, concluded that it would be better to talk to her another time, perhaps when the atmosphere was calmer. So he walked away, telling himself that he was going to the bathroom in search of a little solitude or perhaps just to escape. However, the timing couldn't have been worse. As he ended up bumping into Samuel on the way, the boy, with an expression of contempt, asked what he was doing there again. Adele, maintaining his usual calm, said that he was leaving, but that Samuel could go first if he wanted. Samuel then replied that he would be disgusted just to be near him. At that moment, Adele unleashed his murderous aura without hesitation and insinuated that if Samuel was a reflection of his own family, then it was hard to imagine what kind of spell they had used to create someone so despicable. Samuel turned away angrily, visibly filled with hatred. Adele, with a subtle smile, commented sarcastically on Samuel's wonderful family and wondered what kind of magic had been used to produce something so repulsive. Samuel, furious, threatened to tear him apart, but Adele realized that, unlike Baltan, Samuel wasn't just teasing, he carried genuine hatred and therefore represented a real obstacle to his plans. Adele understood that it would be best to eliminate this problem problem from the start, before it became an enemy difficult to deal with him. Samuel, with a quick gesture, formed an armor around his own body and declared that perhaps no one would mind if he ripped Adele's arm off. But before anything happened, an instructor entered the room and ordered the two to stop, interrupting the tense atmosphere and already preparing to start the lesson. Adele and Samuel still irritated. Samuel then suppressed his power, and Adele, as a precaution, stopped emitting his murderous aura, reflecting that, with just the presence of that teacher, both of their abilities had been neutralized, which made him wonder about the man's true identity. The instructor introduced himself as Robold, an expert in magic, and announced that he would begin teaching immediately. Adele, now more attentive, understood that from his title and the way he entered the room, Robold must be someone extremely skilled, which made the lesson even more interesting in his eyes. When he thought of a fantasy world, the first element that came to mind was magic, but he revealed something that surprised the students, saying that, in his view, magic was not an innate talent or special gift, but something that anyone could learn with dedication and study. For him, magic should be treated as a common subject, which made everyone curious and attentive. He explained that the first step to mastering magic was to understand the attributes, and that the 6 main attributes were earth, water, air, fire, darkness, and light, forming the basis of any magical practice. Adele listened to everything in silence and reflected that most people possessed only one attribute, but he suspected that perhaps they had more than one. He also thought of the Barz family, who were known for their mastery of darkness, but he wasn't sure which attribute represented the lineage of the Arson family to which he belonged. Robold then announced that the day's activity would be to identify each student's attribute by means of a magical orb that would reveal the color corresponding to their type of mana, instructing that the line be formed and that each cadet pass individually. Adele preferred to observe the others before introducing himself. The first cadet who touched the orb revealed the red glow, indicating the fire attribute. The next had a green glow, revealing wind, and so quickly Adel's turn came, he approached the orb slowly, feeling all eyes on him. When he touched his hand, the orb darkened completely around him, while an intense light appeared in the center, revealing something unusual. Robold observed carefully and explained that what he was seeing was extremely rare, half black and half gray. The black indicated the attribute of darkness, something common among high-level demons, but the gray was something unknown, even to him, a tone that had never been recorded before. Adele, surprised, asked how such a magic could exist, but Robold, with a serious expression, replied that he couldn't say anything more on the subject. Adele was thoughtful. He had never heard of an attribute like that, and even worse, he himself had written in the past about a magic that didn't obey natural laws, which seemed to be related to what he had just discovered. Even so, he decided to focus on mastering the attribute of darkness, which he already knew, and left the mystery of gray for later. During the next class, still immersed in his own thoughts, Adele felt someone approaching from behind. It was Prone, and he noticed her presence before she even said anything. Turning around, he asked her what she wanted. Prone, surprised at having been detected, even though she was using a stealth technique, diverted the subject and asked what he was thinking so much about. Adele, without understanding the reason for the question, just answered vaguely, and Prone, impatient, told him to stop playing the fool, since everyone knew that he had provoked Samuel on purpose, making it clear that he didn't like that kind of attitude. Adele then asked if there was a problem with it, and Prone, looking serious, replied that he was messing with the wrong family, and that if the situation got out of hand, not even the authorities outside Saitan would be able to protect him. Adele, confident, said that there was no problem, and suggested that perhaps she didn't know what was at stake. Prone, with a more serious tone, replied that that wasn't the point, because he really hadn't understood. The issue wasn't simply demons against demons, but rather the fact that Samuel's family was more dangerous than he had imagined. In the end, she said that, for the time being, she would just leave him with that warning. But Adele realized that there was something she wasn't fully saying. Perhaps she was trying to help him in a disguised way, or perhaps she was worried about what might happen. Samuel clearly wanted to take revenge on Adele, but Idea, one of the cadets, didn't believe that this was enough to make him a real threat. So Adele decided that, at least for the time being, he should focus on his classes and leave these complications aside. In the next class, the instructor was Ares, who started off with an aggressive tone, calling everyone a failure and stating that none of them deserved to be there. He declared that most of the cadets hadn't even defeated a sword saint with only 5% of their power, which made Adele think that Ares was teasing on purpose, using harsh words to hurt everyone's pride right from the start. The instructor announced that he would be teaching fencing that day, with the aim of giving everyone a chance of surviving on the battlefield. But before anything else, he ordered everyone to run. And before long, the cadets were running laps around a gigantic arena. Ares, with a tone of disdain, explained that the basis of fencing was physical strength. The group was already exhausted by the 30th lap when Ares called Prone and Samuel's attention. Asking who had authorized the use of mana during the race, he He then warned them that they would start all over again, no tricks or shortcuts. Adele watched everything around him and thought that those little rich kids always had some hidden trick, but he had already faced much greater challenges before he even entered the demon realm, such as escaping from a platoon of extremely powerful knights, and he was sure that these spoiled cadets wouldn't have the slightest chance of keeping up with him. After a long time of running, Ares finally finished the lesson. Prone and Samuel were lying on the ground, sweaty, panting, and it was hard to tell if they were crying or if the liquid on their faces was just sweat from the extreme physical effort. The cadets who managed to complete the 50 laps were allowed to return to their dormitories, while those who didn't, like Samuel and Prone, were told that they would have additional classes to make up for their poor performance. Adele thought that today's class had really been no joke. The physical and mental effort had been much more intense than he had expected, and now all he wanted to do was rest. Later, as he walked around the gym complex, he felt that his body was completely exhausted and he couldn't wait to fall into bed, but he realized that he still didn't know exactly where the men's dormitory was since he still hadn't got used to where everything was. It was at that moment that he suddenly felt a hand resting on his shoulder, and as he turned quickly, he recognized the imposing figure of Renee. She was staring at him with a stern expression, and Adele immediately wondered what she was doing there, since he wasn't expecting her at that time or in that place. The tension between the two was intense, and Adele didn't know if this was something that should be resolved now or if it would be better to wait for the next opportunity. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed so you don't miss part 2 of this video. Until the next video.